Hello students, in this video I am going to tell you about the process of pollination. As we have seen microsporogenesis, megasporogenesis that comes under pre-fertilization event. So this pollination also comes under pre-fertilization event. Before fertilization, pollination should be occur in plant for the transfer of male and female gamete. So pollination, first thing, what is the meaning of pollination? I think you all know that it is the transfer of pollen grain. What should be transferred? Transfer of pollen grain from anther to the stigma of same or genetically similar flower. So it is possible only when anthers and stigma mature simultaneously, and this is the very important point, that transfer can occur only when anthers and stigma it matures simultaneously. So cell here is the pollination. Pollination is of two types: self pollination and cross pollination. Self pollination is again two types. One is known as autogamy, second is known as geitonogamy. And this autogamy is again two types: homogamy, this is also known as chasmogamous, and it is clusterogamy. Cross pollination is also known as xenogamy, and this xenogamy and clusterogamy both are comes under allogamy by the scientist. So cross pollination occur by different pollinating agents, and these pollinating agents may be biotic or abiotic component of environment. So you can see some insects, birds, snails, ants, snakes, and in abiotic, wind and water. So when pollination occur through wind, it is known as anemophily. When with water, it is known as hydrophily. When with insect, it is known as entomophily. When with the help of snails, it is known as malcophily. When with the help of ants, it is known as myrmecophily. With the help of bats, it is known as chiropterophily. With the help of birds, it is known as ornithophily. And there are many more like snakes, ophiophily, and so many. So come to the point, what is the self pollination? Self pollination, it is the transfer of pollen grain. As we know, pollen grains occur here. Transfer of pollen grain from anther to the stigma of the same flower. This is known as self pollination, or also known as autogamy. Transfer of pollen grain from anther to the stigma of the same flower. So in this type, pollination is achieved within the same flower, and in a normal flower which opens and exposes the anthers and the stigma, complete autogamy is rather rare, because autogamy in such flowers requires synchrony in pollen release and stigma receptivity. There is two term, uh, pollen release and stigma receptivity. These two should be synchronized, or you can say pollen and stigma should be mature at the same time for self pollination to occur. So next, it autogamy, it occurs in all those intersexual or perfect flowers. As I told you that bisexual flowers are perfect flower where male and female both sex organ present in the same flower. So these either remain closed or where anther and pollen come in contact with stigma by gravity or mechanical means. So autogamy is again two types, homogamy and clusterogamy. In homogamy are chasmogamous. Both an anthers and its stigma are close together. Chasmogamous, both stigma and anthers are close together and they mature simultaneously, or you can say open flower. They mature simultaneously with synchrony in pollen release and stigma receptivity. Example is Vinca rosea or convolvulus, convolvulus and Vinca, or this is also known as Catharanthus. Ranthus roseus. So the anthers occur in the neck of corolla tube as the style grows and the stigma come in contact with ripe anthers and receives the pollen grain. So you can see here in on one plant both type of flower can occur. This is example of chasmogamous and clustergamous flowers of Comelina. So these are the chasmogamous flowers and these are the clustergamous flowers. So it can occur in same plant. So this is chasmogamous where the flowers are open and is flowers are also synchronized. It means that pollen release and stigma receptivity both are in synchronous manner. Next is clustergamous. Clustergamous. In this, the flowers remain closed, means these flowers do not open at all, and the flowers remain closed with anthers and stigma lying close to each other. When the anther dehisces, the pollen grains come in contact with the stigma and pollination takes place. So you can say clustergamous flowers, it ensures self pollination because there is no chance of any cross pollination because they do not open at all. Ensures it also ensures seed set even in the absence of pollination because stigma and anthers are in very close proximity, so there is no need of any pollination to occur. If it there is no pollination, then also seed set occur. So example is Arachis hypogea. This is also known as groundnut, Arachis hypogea, and also Comelina bengalensis, as I shown you this diagram. So clestrogamy is accompanied by uh, geocarpy also, that is formation of fruits inside the soil, as you can see in Arachis groundnut, that is mungfali, and in others clastogamous flowers remain above ground. Sometimes it is above ground in oxalis and viola, etc. So both chasmogamous and clasto in Comelina, it bears both chasmogamous and clastogamous flowers simultaneously but in different position, as you can see in the diagram. Next is that is Geitonogamy. Geitonogamy, this one. So it is the transfer of pollen grain from the anther to the stigma of another flower of the same plant. Another flower of the same plant. So you can see like this. This is called geitonogamy. So transfer of pollen grain from the anther to the stigma of another flower of the same plant. So although geitonogamy is functionally cross pollination because it involving any pollinating agent, it may be wind or anything else or any insect that the pollen grain lands on this stigma. So there is need of pollinating agent, that's why it is functionally called as cross pollination. Cross pollination, but genetically it is similar to autogamy since the pollen grains come from the same plant. So it is genetically it is autogamy. So you have to um, remember these points. This is geitonogamy. Transfer of pollen grain from anther to the stigma of another flower of the same plant. It is functionally cross pollination, but genetically it is autogamy because pollen come from the same plant. So next is xenogamy. This is also known as cross pollination. So it is the transfer of pollen from anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower, and this is insect, bees,